Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am Briar Harvey. This is the Neurodiversity Media Network, and I am here today with Haley Shane. We're going to be talking about world building, which is very related to a brand, believe it or not. And we stuck our toe in this in the last episode. So I really want to dig into this. First of all, what is a world? What are we building?
Yeah, so any piece of entertainment media that you've ever consumed, if it's a video game, a book, a movie, a show, whatever, they all have things in common. They're telling a story, and we know as marketers how important stories are. We get told this all the time, like, oh, you have to tell stories, blah 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 blah. They have characters, and they have a world where all of that takes place. They have built a world for all of those characters to live in and for that story to be told. Game of Thrones, for example, is medieval fantasy. That story takes place in a world where dragons are real. And so that adds certain things to the story and to the characters and stuff like that, right? A more modern example, Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad takes place in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It takes place in the desert. There's kingpins, there's drugs, there's, stuff like that. Mad Men, 1960s, Madison Avenue in New York City. All of these are worlds that these showrunners have built for the story that they're telling to take place in. You, as a human, are writing a story just as you live and go throughout your day-to-day life. The brand that you're creating, especially if it's a personal brand, but this can go for corporate brands too, is a pillar in that world. And so it's, what world do you want to create? Like when you envision the world that you want, what does it look like? You can build that through your brand. And this is where, and we've talked about like brand values where they come into play and the mission that you're on and things like that. All of this stuff is kind of directly related and in the bigger scheme of the world that you want to build for your brand. So this is a little higher level than some of the stuff that we've been talking about,
but no less important, because if you haven't built a world for your brand, then you can't really invite people into it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And so let's start at the top. How do we build our world? What does that look like?
Yeah. So first thing, there's two kinds of world building. There's hard and there's soft. To give an example of hard world building is Lord of the Rings. If you've ever read any of the Lord of the Rings books, you know how detailed they are. There is nothing left up to the reader. Like there's entire chapters that are dedicated just to how the languages work. Okay.
There are whole books written about setting and
everything.
Backstory, and
yeah, he thought of everything. Nothing is left up to question. There is an answer for every question. It's just a matter of where it is in what books, right? Or the movies, if you watch the movies. Okay. That is hard world building. That is a very strict set of rules and guidelines, and you do not go outside of those rules and guidelines. You have to think of an answer for every single thing. Okay. Soft world building, however, is more like Harry Potter, where a lot of the detail is actually left up to the reader or the audience in this case, which is just the audience of your brand. You can kind of have some fun with this and play around with what the answers to those questions are, because maybe you just don't have the time or mental capacity to do the hard world building thing and think of a answer for every single question. This kind of gives your audience a little bit of freedom and it kind of lets them participate in it, right? Where this can go wrong, we see, and I love J.K. Rowling, just to be clear, but her clarifications over the years of some of the finer details of Harry Potter have ruined some of the illusion and magic, around it. Like nobody asked if Hogwarts had bathrooms. She felt the need to clarify anyway. They don't, by the way, and so you probably have this image of like wizards running around shitting all over the floor because there's no bathrooms. So that if you're answering questions that weren't asked, it can go a little sideways. But this is really good if maybe you don't exactly know what kind of world you want to build and you're actually yourself still figuring it out. This is the better option, especially if you're a solopreneur too. This gives you a lot of freedom. Um, and it doesn't take as much time. Hard world building is better for corporate style brands. If you have a large team and they all need to be very like, tunnel visioned on what it is that they're doing, that really strict set of rules and guidelines is going to be good for like a big team. So,
I mean, it's basically an SOP, right? It's an
yeah.
SOP for the world,
Hmm.
and that's what you have to have at a certain size, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a creative standard operating procedure.
So, the thing of even hard or soft, the issue we run into is fan fiction.
Yeah.
When you invite people into your world,
Now I'm thinking of all the bad like Sonic fan fiction.
oh god,
Which if you've never googled that, by the way,
don't.
please do. No, do you owe it to yourself to see that nightmare.
And that's kind of the thing here, right? Like when we're inviting people in, they get to make up their own parts of the world.
Mhm.
When you invite people into the Lord of the Rings, there may be some interesting shipping happening.
Yeah.
But orcs are still orcs and elves are still elves, and the world is still the same. Meanwhile, when you invite people into Harry Potter, not only do you get really interesting shipping, you get whole shifts in potential story or
Mhm.
characters because that's what soft world building invites.
Mhm.
How do we set guardrails on this?
Yeah, so these are kind of like the bumper rails like when you go bowling. You know what I mean? Like they're not hard and fast rules, but they just kind of, they bump you back in the direction. That is deciding for you what's important. Like maybe okay, you brought up like the relationship thing, like different shipping that happens. Maybe you don't really care all that much about who the audience thinks should get together. Maybe you care a lot about certain characters and their profession and what they're good at. Like maybe that making sure that that is set in stone is really important to you, and then all this other stuff it's like well, if people want to have fun with that, then go ahead. So that's the first thing you need to do is just decide what's important, right? And then once you do that, you can take a hard world building approach to it. Like you can, you know, be a little bit more detailed about those particular things. Not Tom Clancy detailed, but which if
Does
you've
anyone
never read a
need
Tom Clancy book,
Tom
holy
Clancy
shit.
detail? Right.
Yeah.
But when we're dealing with the US military and the government, even when we're
Yeah.
rewriting history and changing all of the rules, there are still structural guidelines that we have to follow. What do those things actually look like in a brand?
Yeah, so I think really the way that I think about it is okay, there's your idea of a perfect world. And so we reverse engineer from that. For example, one of the things if I could just create the world, however like the actual world that we're living in, however I wanted to do it, um I would not put people that are creative under fluorescent lights 9 to 5. It would be illegal. Like
I'm
that's
signing
one
up
of
for this world.
okay, that's one of the things that like I think is very important. Something else that I think is very important. I think we should take all politicians and throw them in a pit and make them fight for blood sport and pay-per-view it.
I would subscribe to this channel as well. Yes.
If I could make that happen, Dana White would like present this event at like UFC 3000 or whatever the fuck it would be. And yeah, we would make them fight for fun and profit. That's a value that I have. But so we're working backwards from that. It's like, okay, what can I do to help build that world? Can I help people like get out of the 9 to 5 stuff? Can I give people the tools to accelerate their growth in their business? Like, what does that world look like? Is that important to me?
And when we're building this shit out structurally, what does it look like?
Yeah. So I think a lot of it you have to start with the brand and everything that we've talked about. So who your actual audience is, the mission, the goals, the purpose, like kind of the vision that you have overall for the brand. I think all of that is really where you have to start. It's that foundational kind of stuff. And then the world will kind of reveal itself the more of that you can flesh out, right?
So, when we're building a world, we are creating values and things that are important to us.
Hmm.
And we are populating it with people who are our ideal client avatar, right? And we
Which are
are
just people that share that vision,
right.
right? Like you said, you would sign up to my, you know, ideal world.
Yeah, I've opted into your world, and now you're gonna tell the story. We talked about that last time.
Hmm.
So, what does it mean to be in your world?
Yeah. Well, when you think about it, like again, any sort of media that you've ever consumed, like there's rules, saying that in quotes, there's rules that you have to follow. There's a certain way that you do shit in that world, right? It's like coming into somebody's house, like, hey, there's a certain way that we roll around here, right? Kind of the same thing. And like even in different regions, we do shit kind of different down here in the South than people in, the Pacific Northwest do. We're in two completely different sides of the country. So that knowing that, just like, okay, this is kind of how we roll. And if you're cool with that, then come join us. And if not, go find somewhere else where you feel like you fit in and you belong. You know, not everybody that reads Harry Potter is going to read Lord of the Rings. I'm sure there's some overlap there, but it's two very different, it's very different authors, it's very different styles of writing, it's a very different world, very different characters. The magic element is the same maybe, but yeah, but for the most part they're different audiences.
Hmm. They're different audiences and they come to it from different places, which is so what makes a person in your world uniquely yours? Like how are we figuring out who belongs and who doesn't?
Hmm. Yeah, I think the easiest way to look at it is just the same way that you look at characters within that world. You know, if you tried to do like a Mad Men Game of Thrones crossover, that is not going to work for a lot of reasons. Like your characters are way fucking out of place. If you took Don Draper and stuck him in, House Lannister, it's gonna be weird. You don't even have to watch either show to be like, this isn't right. You know what I mean? So that's one way is just and we can go into like the visual stuff with that too. Like that would obviously be what people would notice first, but um it's just thinking of your audience as characters or players in a game if you prefer the video game analogy more. So, you know, we don't want to call them NPCs, but
Right, I was just about to
that
say. So what's the
yeah,
difference
it
between
would
our
be it
characters and an NPC in our world,
right.
right?
Yeah. So NPCs help flesh the world out, right? Whereas a player, you're actively involved in the story and in the world building and stuff like that. Whereas NPCs are just kind of they're filling space, basically. Um, Sometimes anyway, sometimes they're really well fleshed out and very intelligent NPCs, like in Red Dead 2. The NPC system in that game is absolutely fucking unreal how good it is. So, there's nuance to all of this, obviously. So,
There is, but NPCs are what are going to invite people to interact,
hmm
right? You're building for your player characters, but
yeah.
the NPCs are part of the landscape.
Well, and I think too, this kind of just occurred to me, like talking about this, like NPCs could just be the wider audience, whereas main characters, like you know, you're speaking to one person, obviously, and so you want them to feel like they're the main character, but then you've got all this kind of supporting cast, which is also, you look at the Thousand True Fans model, maybe that's like your supporting cast, and then your most loyal feel like the main character. I just had this thought and I'm like working through it as I'm talking about it, so that might not make any sense, but
No, it does though. I mean, just because I won't probably ever subscribe to Mr. Beast's YouTube channel does not
mhm.
mean that I haven't, in fact, seen probably not a whole Mr. Beast video, but a part of one.
Yeah.
So there are rings.
Mhm.
Ring theory does kind of apply here.
Yeah.
And when we're world building, we're building for the people in the center.
Yeah, exactly. So, we want main character syndrome.
Hmm. And so obviously that is visual, but there's more to it than that.
I think a lot of it is behind the scenes, back in kind of intangible stuff. I think it's more strategy, storytelling, messaging, that level of stuff than it is visual. Like visual has its place, obviously, and that's what we notice first as humans. We notice pictures, but I think to really create like a strong character profile and a strong world and stuff like that, it's more behind the scenes, what I would call brand strategy.
Yeah, I think so. And I think this is where people get stuck because this is part of what we know instinctively that we should have, but
hmm
don't have any idea how to create.
Yeah, and it's hard to. A lot of this can be applied to community building. Like you're building a destination for people to gather, right? And people have problems with that because it can be, you know, it can be difficult to build and to grow a community.
Community building is really
It's tough.
probably harder than most people give it credit for,
It's very
especially
tough.
if they learned how to build a community in 2014 on Facebook.
Yeah.
Obviously, you think you're great at it because it was 2014 Facebook, but that was just so. What are those intangibles?
for community world building.
Yeah, what are the things, what are the intangible touch points that really pull people in and go, "Oh, I want to be a part of this."
Yeah, I think a lot of it is like that very lizard brain tribal urge to, be in a group, to have that human connection with other people that we have things in common with. And I know that there's going to be a lot of like AI diehards that are like, that's not true. Kiss my ass. It's true. And it's never going to change. Like, technology evolves very, very, very rapidly. Human behavior evolves over millions of years, right? We probably will not see human behavior change all that much in our lifetime. Um, and a lot of that is just adapting to technology very slowly, might I add. At the end of the day, we still want that connection and that tribe that we can hang out with, that we share goals with, that we have similar views with, all of that. And there's a very primal thing inside of us that drives that. So the answer to the question really is like, what is it inside of your ideal customer's brain that drives that? What is it that they want? Like, why do they want that connection? Because if you figure that out, you can build anything for it. Then it's just a matter, it's the tactical stuff like, okay, well, what platform is best for this? And this is where the technology and shit comes in. And you can do that wherever, you can figure that out. Like maybe they all hang out on Twitter, or oh, maybe they all hang out, like maybe they watch a lot of YouTube. Maybe they all hang out on Discord. That's not, who cares? Like that's not the important part. The important part is like the psychological feeling behind it. Why do they want to be a part of this world? Why do they feel like they need to find something to be a part of?
And how
Figure
are
that
we
out and then you
selling
can do the
that?
rest. Huh?
Yeah, and then how are we selling that,
Right.
right? Because it's not enough to invite someone in,
Yeah.
especially if we're
Come
charging
to
money
my
for it.
camp. We're building
Mhm,
this. I've
mhm.
got actually, hang on, let me pull this up because this is really good. Notepad app, please. There we go. Okay. Let me. So this is like the outline that I had for Brandwild. These are, I'm literally just going to read like from my notes. Okay. So there's four parts to this basically. There's your camp, which is, that's home base, right? That's where you feel safe. This is where you can kind of plan your next move. This is more than likely where you are at right now. You feel good, you feel secure, right? And then you've got like the gang that's around that. These are the ride or die, super loyal, true 1000 fans, customers, clients, however it applies to you. Like, you've got their back, they've got your back. Everybody knows that everybody's good. Outside of that is the world where all of this is taking place. Okay. Your audience, your wider audience is a part of this. Okay. You are a part of this. Your true 1000 is a part of this. The camp that you come back to is a part of this. This is like that outer ring, right? And then outside of that is the common enemy, the villain. This can be the law, the government, the system, the matrix, the whatever it is that you're fighting against. It doesn't have to be a person. Probably shouldn't be a person, actually. And I think we've gotten into the common enemy thing before on this. So that's kind of the four parts that I figured out to all of this. If you look at this kind of as like a frontier that you're conquering, that's each sort of ring. Yes, you can do this completely digitally. It has been done before. So you can also do this in person if time, money, and budget and all of that stuff allows. So that's the pillars, in my opinion, I think, to to
Yeah,
brand
and
well.
we have talked about common enemy, but I want to revisit it here because that's such an important part of world building.
Hmm.
You can't have Lord of the Rings without Sauron,
Of
and there
course
is
not.
no Harry Potter without
Without
Voldemort.
Voldemort, yeah.
So what you're
There's no Game of
when
Thrones without the White Walkers.
right.
There's no Mad Men without the other agencies. There's no
Mhm.
Breaking Bad without Gus and like the cartels.
Mhm. Yeah, the common enemy is a really important piece of the world building. And I think that, and I'm speaking from experience, finding that is really difficult because we don't want to other people.
Hmm. Yeah. It doesn't have to be a person. And I keep telling people this because this is one of those things that digital marketers they hear and they're like, "Oh, that's awesome." And then they turn into an asshole because they think that's what that means.
They
I
do.
want I want to be very very clear about something. The common enemy 99% of the time is not another person. Okay? Attack the process, not the person. There's a million people that do branding, and there's a lot that I completely disagree with how they do it. I could name them by name. I'm not going to because that's not important. I want to figure out how it is that they do things and attack that. I don't like their process, and here is why I don't think that it's effective. This is what I do instead, and this is why. Okay. Same thing, like you hear this all the time, like the whole escape the matrix thing.
Hmm.
The matrix is the enemy. That's not a person, that's a thing. The
Hmm.
government, that's not a person, that's a thing. The law, that's not a person, that's a thing. Right?
No, there's many
It's
of these
comprised of
systems.
people.
Right.
Yeah, but it's not one individual person. I saw this so much during the virus pandemic that shall not be named and the 2016 election. I saw so many people that were business owners that I widely regarded as experts in their field that were very knowledgeable, that were great service providers, burn their reputation to the fucking ground because they just had to post their opinion about Donald Trump or they had to post their opinion about masks. Because here's the issue with something like that, making something like that your enemy. Okay. I'm an anti-masker, whatever. I'm going to use my platform to talk about how stupid it is that we all had to wear masks. Guess what happens eventually? We stop wearing them anyway because the pandemic ends and everything goes back to normal. Eventually, Donald Trump isn't president anymore. Whether that's in 2 years because he got impeached, that's in 4 years, that's in 8 years, it doesn't matter. Eventually, it fucking ends. Eventually, the pandemic ends. It's over. And eventually, on a long enough timeline, people fucking forget that it happened to begin with. There are people being born right now that do not fucking know who Donald Trump is.
How nice for them, huh?
Right? Right. But what people don't forget is the web developer that made everyone feel like a piece of shit because he told them that they were stupid because they were wearing masks. Because he was told to pick the fucking common enemy and he fucked up. And instead of picking the system that tells you to wear masks, he attacked individuals that wear masks. The If you wanted the common enemy to do it correctly, it should have been the government. Fuck the government. You can't tell me what to do. Get your little Gadsden flag out. Don't tread on me. You can
That's
keep
still going
that
to
shit up
alienate people
forever.
too.
It
But
is, but you're doing it in the right way.
mhm.
Alienating people isn't bad, right? I personally don't want bootlickers to follow me. Like, like that probably alienated people. They're like, but I love the government and yay, Marxism. Fuck off. I don't want you in my audience. You are not going to like what I say. I had somebody follow me on Twitter the other day. They followed me and I went and I looked at their profile and it was like They were super leftist. They were anti-gun. I was like, buddy, you're not gonna make it. You can make people unfollow you. You can remove followers. I just went ahead and did him the favor. I was like, you're not gonna like it around here. You're not.
No,
You know.
no, you're not going to like it. And we're not going to have a good time together.
No.
And
So
we
let's
should
just
just
not
go
even
our separate
let's
ways.
just not even go down that road, right? But you know, I never specifically attacked somebody for who they voted for, or if they wore a mask or didn't, or if they got a vaccine or didn't. I will let my opinion be known and my stance on it, and how I'm very fuck the government. I don't like the government. I don't think that they should be in charge of anything. Like, I'm very vocal about that opinion that I have. That's the enemy for me. That's the common enemy, the villain of the world that I'm choosing to build, is the government.
Yeah, and it doesn't, systems work. So mine is very literally executive dysfunction, which
Mm-hmm.
I guess makes us all the enemy and
Yeah.
not, right? But that's part of why that works for me, is that there's no person or entity I can just be like, this is a thing that is bad and we're railing against
Mm-hmm.
this as a thing.
Yeah.
How do people identify their common enemy?
For me, so I think it's different for everybody, but um I have always said people bond over what they hate more than what they like. I had this was years ago, but I had a meeting with a client. We were doing a strategy session, and one of the questions that I ask when we go through figuring out who the target audience is what kind of brands do they like. And I asked that, and she completely blanked. Like, she had no like answer to it whatsoever. And I thought about a conversation that we had had at band practice a couple of weeks prior. We were all talking about what bands we like. And we're like, oh yeah, I like Aerosmith. Oh yeah, I like, whatever. Yeah, I like them. And then somebody said, you know how I don't fucking like Bob Dylan? And we were all like, oh my God, fuck Bob Dylan. Like, we just erupted. We're like, yeah, no, Bob Dylan sucks. Like, I hate Bob Dylan. And then our bass player was like, I kind of like him. We kicked him out. Um, yeah, found a new bass player because, like, fuck you. And then that led into, who else I hate? Bruce Springsteen. Fuck the boss. Uh, it spiraled out of control. And so I remembered this, and I told my
Clearly.
client, I was like, okay, fuck what they like. What brands do they not like, and why? And she just starts just rattling them off. She's like, oh, she hates this because blah, 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 blah. She hates this brand because blah, blah, blah. So that's where I would start. Like, what do you vehemently, passionately hate? And why? Why do you hate it? So there's probably at least some clues in there as to what your common enemy is. Yeah. Like me, one of the
Well,
pillars
and
that I built my brand on was I don't like that boring shit exists. I think that if a company is going to ask you for money, that they should do a little bit more than the bare minimum to earn it. That's why my title forever was the Slayer of Boring Brands. So, yeah.
well, I do think it's key that you personally dislike the common enemy, or it's not going to work for you as a selling point.
Yeah, like, I mean, obviously, like, you have to actually have some passion about this, or you're probably not going to be able to keep it up. Like, I could talk about how much I hate Bruce Springsteen all fucking day. It would not be hard for me.
That
Like,
saddens me
I
deeply,
God, I
Haley.
don't get who the fuck just sits around and jams out to that, man. Like, I could not imagine being like, hey, man, you know what we should do? We should crack open a couple beers, listen to Board to Run. Like, shut up.
I
Like,
mean, I acknowledge that that is fair.
I
He's
just don't
fine
get
on a
it.
playlist, okay? I can't be a heavy supporter of the boss in his defense here. Just he's fine on a playlist. So
Mate, I don't know. I heard "Born in the USA" 1,500 times over the weekend, so I'm a little bit more sour on Bruce than I normally would be, but that's still like
it's it's true, I'm sure.
fuck the boss. I'll say it.
So
I fear no Bruce Springsteen fan either. If they want to come at me, we'll bare knuckle box in the street. I ain't worried about it. Like,
so there's commitment, and that's important. The
yeah.
other part of this is time, right?
Hmm.
Like, I don't think people really understand how long it takes to build a world, but Tolkien was writing about Middle Earth for what, a decade before The
Decades.
Hobbit was published.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
J.K. Rowling.
this is a super long term thing. I think JK
Mhm.
started Harry Potter when she was like 25 and it wasn't published until she was like well into her 30s.
Right. And she had mapped more or less the entirety of the show
Mhm.
before she had, or the series
Yeah.
before she had started writing anything at all.
Mhm.
So when we're talking about world building, when it
And
comes
had wrote other books that were not successful.
right, so we got to figure out what it looks like to build a world while also bringing in income.
Yeah. So I will to give one of my favorite examples of online only world building. There is a podcast called Welcome to Night Vale.
I love Night Vale.
I do too. It's so good. So I can remember like one of the things that I heard, it was a commercial during the podcast and it was like the weather outside is 78 degrees and it's partly cloudy and we're reminding all citizens do not go to the dog park, and I was like, yo, what the fuck is this? Like, why can't they go to the dog park? What's happening? And this was kind of my first little introduction into Night Vale, right? So they it, Night Vale is, it's absolutely hilarious. It's kind of weird. It's very strange. Um One of the like things that sticks out to me too about it is they describe the local pizza shop. All of their pizza is gluten free because they had a ban on wheat and wheat byproducts because all of the wheat and wheat byproducts turned into venomous snakes. Like, it's just this weird kind of surreal, off the wall kind of humor that I really like. But it started off as like a little podcast. Like, now they have a parent company called Night Vale Presents. They have so many millions of downloads a month. They've done a live tour in like 30 states and I think like 15 or 16 different countries. They've released 2 books. They have behind the scenes commentary from the show. They've released 2 graphic novels. They've done all of this stuff, but it started off just as like an audio only podcast, right? But they built that world through an audio only podcast. They didn't start off with like graphic novels and shit like that. And so I think while you're while you're building it, you do have to make money and you have to make sure that like your needs are met and stuff like that. But if you take the time to pay attention to like the types of clients and stuff like that that you're getting, they can help affect the world too. They're characters that you run into on your journey of, adventure or however you want to think about it. Oh, I cannot hear you.
Because we're building this for them, we can like change the world as we go. There is benefit to building in real time.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, I think, where soft world building really comes into play because you're going to be adjusting a lot of this on the fly anyway, especially if you're new to business completely, not just a new business. If you're new to this completely, there is a lot of shit that you're going to learn works for you, that doesn't work for you. So I wouldn't go super hard in the paint on the details right off of the bat because of that reason. So,
Well, and I think that's like, of all the messages to end here with, it's that one. Like, don't go the Tolkien route unless you
no.
want to be broke and talking about your novel for the next 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you want to do that, if you have like the financial backing to be able to just focus on that, sure, go for it. I'm going to, probably bet that 99% of the people listening to this do not have that luxury. So it's the soft world building route for you.
And that's okay. It just means you have to experiment more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is fun if you let it be fun.
Right, but
Yeah.
you have to actually let it be fun.
Yeah, and I see that a lot too. People are like, "Oh my god, I have to like test and adjust." It's like, okay, that can be fun. Like, it doesn't have to be, horrible like pulling teeth.
So, how do you encourage people to make it fun?
Yeah, well, for me, and again, this is for me. I like the discovery aspect of new things. Like that excites me. Test and adjust excites me if I can be like, okay, I'm going to learn something one way or the other. This might flop, this test might go horribly, this redesign might fucking ruin everything, but I'm gonna find out. Like that for me is exciting. And so I think it's just that's more of a case by case basis where you have to figure out what gets you excited about things because that might not do it for you. There might be other aspects of it that excite you. So you just have to figure out what that is.
Yeah, I feel like being excited about the process and reinventing on the fly is kind of necessary
Mm-hmm.
here.
Yeah, yeah. This is definitely and branding in general is a long term thing. World building, I'm talking like a decades long thing. Brand building, yeah, 4 or 5 years. You know, maybe longer, maybe shorter, just depending on how you're doing it and the person and all of that. But for the most part, you can get it done in 4 or 5 years. World building takes a long, long time. Yeah. So do not try to do this in a month and then beat yourself up when you didn't do it in a month. Like, give it 9 more years and you'll be on your way.
I don't think people want to hear that though.
No, of course not. But it's the truth. So it's like anything. You get your 10,000 hours in, right?
Hmm.
No.
Okay. So, what do you want to leave people with here?
Hmm. I I would encourage people to at least start thinking about this because this is one of the ways that you get to keep your brand fresh. You don't have to mutter the words like, "Oh, I think it's time for a brand refresh," because it's constantly happening. If you do this and you can think about this and you can start to kind of bake this into your brand, it doesn't get stagnant because it's constantly changing. And this goes with the experience stuff that we've been talking about, like on this podcast as a whole, is you're giving people a destination to come to, which is the world building, and then you're giving them an experience to have, which makes them want to come back and makes them want to buy from you, makes them want to give you money, and like all of this stuff, right? So it is worth, as overwhelming as it sounds and as overwhelming as it can be, it's worth thinking about.
One last question. Do you
Okay.
have any like documentation? I know you use notebooks. So, but do
Hmm.
you recommend people document this in any specific way or just whatever works for them?
I think whatever works for them. I'm big on pencil and paper, and I think that's part of that is the artist in me. I just always have a sketchbook and a pencil near me. Um, but I kind of like just the energy exchange of it too. Typing doesn't give me the same I don't know what to call it, that same like release, I guess, as actually writing it down does. So that's for me personally. If you like to type, type. If maybe you use voice notes, you use video, like whatever. Yeah, whatever works. But I would, if you're having trouble thinking about it, like just go be bored for a little bit. Get the fuck off your laptop. Get off your fucking phone. Go for a walk, go take a shower. I'm big on taking showers when you're creatively blocked. I have a whole thing around it called shower thoughts. So, um, yeah, go do that, and then it'll kind of start to piece itself together. I also like, and this is so fucking nerdy, but it works. I like to use Minecraft because you build whatever the fuck you want. Like, go into creative mode and build your world. Is it medieval fantasy Game of Thrones? Is it super like modern? Is it, you know, whatever, like mid-century Japanese with like samurais and shit? Go build it. Just a great tool for people that maybe can't draw or like visualize and stuff like that. So
Somebody was telling me recently about an app that does like actual cartography, and I was like, "Oh, I need to never know what that is
no,
because I will spend whole months of my life making maps
yeah,
for worlds that
oh
don't
yeah.
exist."
Something else too that you can use. World building is a big thing in D&D. So
Mhm.
if you've ever ran a D&D campaign, you've done this before, whether or not you've realized that you've done it. There's plenty of planners online that you can use, and it's set up for a D&D campaign, but like set it up the same way. And honestly, that framework probably wouldn't be a bad thing. Um, I had an ideal buyer profile document that looked like a D&D character sheet. It was just tweaked for business owners. Stuff like that's a great framework if you're just trying to like pull it out of thin air. It's going to be really hard. But if you can give yourself kind of some rules and guidelines, which is again what world building is, you're building a world to play in, right? So,
Mhm.
so you can be more creative, as backwards as that sounds, but yeah, anything like that that'll give you like a foundation to build on. Just go
I
look up a
agree.
D&D world builder.
Mhm. I mean, and they offer those online too. You can go and build a world completely in your mind
Yeah.
and see what happens with it. This
Yeah,
is
and then
about
if you really want to take it a step further, you can go to Hero Forge, create a little
oh yeah,
3D model of your characters, of your NPCs, of your audience, of your core 1000, whatever.
and then you just got to find somebody with a 3D printer.
I have a
Don't
3D
buy
printer.
one. Oh,
Yeah,
stop, Haley. Gonna I
because of
don't have
course I have a
room
3D
for
printer.
a
Why wouldn't I?
3D printer.
I'm just saying, Anycubic's got a really good sale going on right now. They emailed me the other day.
All right. So this has been great. I think we should, wrap it here with just the idea that it's about experimentation. It's
Hmm.
about playing.
Yeah.
And I really want you to enjoy the process. When you're building the world that your brand lives in, it should be fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and approach it in a way that's fun. Like building a, fictitious video game or D&D world or something like that would be fun to me, and so that's probably how I would approach it. I would use those tools, you know. Maybe somebody's watching this and they're really into fiction books and it would be better for them to approach it in the way that you would a fiction book. Well, then approach it like that. There's no rules. Just do whatever the fuck you want. like
Right. Make it fun for you. And I feel like this is a process that you should actually be integrating into like rituals and planning and things.
yeah,
If
absolutely.
if your business is a world, you should be going there fairly regularly to
Mhm.
check in on the NPCs and
Mhm.
make sure there's not any trash that you need to pick up.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what that looks like.
Yeah, clean your backyard a little bit, right?
Absolutely.
chop wood, carry water, those types of tasks.
So we have one more of these booked, Haley. I think we'll wrap it all up and
Mhm.
tie it in a bow and leave people with how to build a brand that they like that doesn't make them want to stab themselves in the eye. I mean,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, that's my goal, and I always say with this, like, this should be fun, it shouldn't feel like a burden, you know? If showing up for your brand every single day is like, "Ugh," something went wrong somewhere along the way. Like,
Mhm.
this shit should feel really fucking fun.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want it to feel fun again for people. That's the
Me
goal.
too.
All right, y'all. Thank you for being. Thank you for coming, and we will see y'all again in 2 weeks. Have a good one.